Hello, everyone, and this is my textual introduction to The Woman of Color, A Tale. The other video will show you some more contextual information. In this video, I'm going to begin reading the book along with you and pointing out some significant moments so that you'll be a little bit more aware as you read it and encounter it, if that's something that's useful for you. I know sometimes in online classes, people struggle to get started. So you'll see that as it's structured, the beginning of the structure is in letters, epistolary, as with Clarissa. Olivia seems like more of a narrator than a letter writer sometimes, and a lot of this novel is her voice, so it will be different from Clarissa in that capacity. So we see Packet the first, and what you will notice is that letters were often, let me see if it lets me look at the footnote here. Nope. Letters were often sent in kind of packets to reduce postage, especially from afar, but also to keep them safe. I mean, they're small. If you have a number of things going to Jamaica, it makes more sense to have them sent to Jamaica in bulk and then have them distributed there rather than hope that, 50 different items somehow manage to make it. Although I guess the one big one could fail, but look, we won't go with that. So this is from Olivia Fairfield to Mrs. Milbank, her friend, and she is at sea. And it is around 1800, maybe a little bit later. So at the very end, chronologically, of what we are doing in this class. And we start. Launched on a new world, what can have power to console me for leaving the scenes of my infancy and the friend of my youth? Nothing but the consciousness of acting in obedience to the commands of my departed father. Oh, dearest Mrs. Milbank, your poor girl is every minute wishing for your friendly guidance, your maternal counsel, your sober judgment, every day as it takes me farther from Jamaica, as it brings me nearer to England, heightens my fears of the future, and makes my presaging heart sink within itself. You charged me to confide to you its every throb, and till it ceases to beat, it will turn with the warmest affection to my earliest and best friend, my governess, my instructress. And I cannot help asking why I am sent from her. Why was it necessary for Olivia Fairfield to tempt the untried deep and untried friends? But I check these useless interrogatories, these vain regrets, by recollecting that it was the will of him who always studied the happiness of his child. Okay, so let's unpack that. One thing that will strike you right away is that often the Western Hemisphere, meaning like the West Indies, the American colonies, etc., and of course newly United States, those were often considered the New World. And Britain and Europe would be considered the Old World. So immediately this novel shows that the Old World is new to Olivia and the New World is familiar and older to her. So it's already beginning this process of what one might call what is often called defamiliarization, or making strange of something that would have been familiar. If you're in Britain and you are realizing that your country is the New World, you might sit up and take notice. Well, what are people going to notice about this region I take for granted? You're also learning, as in many cases, about the character of Olivia. We learn that she respects her father's last wish. We learn that she has had a woman friend who has been very helpful to her, who has been like a mother after the loss of her own mother. And we learn that Olivia has some amount of emotional sensitivity and maturity. She's aware that what she's scared of. She understands she's afraid of the future. She's not silly. Makes my presaging heart sink within itself. She is worried about the future. She, is trying to anticipate what's going to happen next, to presage. Not quite psychically, but you could interpret it that way if you were interested in going in that direction. And she's loyal to Mrs. Milbank, her governess, who taught her. And, she worries about this ocean voyage. It would have been terrifying to sail across the Atlantic Ocean in any capacity, but certainly for the first time as a young woman going to an unfamiliar location, especially a biracial young woman going to a predominantly white community that may never have met anyone like her before. It's incredibly brave of her to be doing this. And her father, whom we learn was white, gives her the strength to do this. Although, her mother, I'm sure, did too, but it's shown as like this is important to her because it's where her father came from, and we will learn that her mother came from Jamaica, where she has been living. My dear father, dotingly fond as he was of his Olivia, saw her situation. So she's talking about herself in the third person. Just be aware of that as you're reading. If it seems confusing, kind of rewind back and make sure you've got it. Make sure you've got it. Olivia, we are learning, is the illegitimate offspring of an enslaved woman whom her father loved very much and wished, we assume, to marry. And the illegitimate offspring, she says, of his slave could never be considered in the light of equality by the English planters. Such is their prejudice, such is the wretched state of degradation to which my unhappy fellow creatures are sunk in the Western Hemisphere. We are considered, my dear Mrs. Milbank, as an inferior race. This Mrs. Milbank knows she lives there, but this is a kind of exposition happening. As an inferior race, but little removed from the brutes, because the Almighty Maker of all created beings has tinged our skins with jet instead of ivory. I say our, for though the jet has been faded to the olive in my own complexion, yet I am not ashamed to acknowledge my affinity with the swarthiest Negro, etc., etc. Okay, so we'll, let's take a look at these words and what they're doing. So Olivia's backstory, her white, wealthy father falls in love with an enslaved woman, we learn, and loves her loves Olivia as his daughter, his child. This is, of course, very transgressive from the perspective of many common practices in labor and enslaved people in the Western Hemisphere. Kitty cat, stop scratching that. Sorry. It's, cats are gonna cat. You would have families that were split up. You would have offspring who were not acknowledged. Her father is shown to be someone who, attempts to be progressive in an oppressive system. And of course, it sounds like he has protected Olivia thus far, but once he dies, she is placed in a slightly more vulnerable position. And so, the English planters who were living in Jamaica at this time did not see Olivia as their equal. And so, of course, Olivia could not find a spouse there who her father would have approved of, and so she is going back to England. Of course, there's a lot of struggle here. If you've read other books about biracial heroines, the most famous one I think that is taught at the undergraduate level would be Passing by Nella Larsen, where you have women who have in some way been placed at a remove from a Black community, or who are very, very light-skinned, or who have, moved social classes, it becomes very difficult to find the right partner. And this is one of the struggles of this book. The English planters are racist. I mean, there's this, even though this book is ostensibly written by an anonymous author who some believe is also biracial, I encourage you to think about what you think as you read it, when it comes to authenticity and your own experience. It's not without racism, even if we have minority voices. There are, the time in which this is written, there's a lot of colorism, and you will see certain stereotypes come out anyway, regardless, to, I think, in some ways show that Olivia is a sympathetic character to a white audience who would be the predominant audience for this book in terms of disposable income, literacy, etc. And Olivia's literacy immediately strikes anyone reading this. Like, she's very eloquent, which is a problematic word today too. But enjoying her writing is something that helps endear Olivia to the reader. So, race is shown as synonymous with skin color in some ways in this novel, and certainly the Almighty Maker has tinged our skins with jet instead of ivory, creates different, I guess, shades of value. Jet is a valuable and beautiful material. Ivory is a beautiful and valuable material. And so, she is trying to compare the racism in which she has grown up and been raised and that she's confronted throughout her life. And then in contrast to her Christianity, which sees her skin color as a difference that does not have a value judgment attached to it. She also, and this is another way that the novel creates affinity for Olivia with a readership that might be either naive or resistant, or just maybe concerned that they would not relate as much to this to a biracial heroine. Obviously now we read all kinds of books, and it's whether whatever your racial background is, you are reading books hopefully by authors who have had very different lived experience from your own, and hopefully some with very similar lived experience to your own. We all deserve both of those kinds of experience. As she says, tinged our skins. I say our, for though the jet has been faded to the olive in my own complexion. She's describing herself in this phrase while she is also kind of analyzing her appearance, which I think is a bit different from what you see with white characters, where they might describe having paler skin or something like that, but whiteness is often taken for granted, or is not self-analyzed in this capacity. So if you've talked about race and ethnic studies before or studied it, you will be experienced in thinking about how sometimes whiteness is not marked in the same way that blackness and other kinds of race are marked in texts. And in terms of what makes her, quote unquote, relatable to audiences, she has no shame about her background. She knows who she is. She understands who she is. She is not trying to be white on one side or black on the other. She's working within this complex hybridity. And so enjoy the book.